We are going to have a discussion now about the situation that is unfolding and tensions that seem to be brewing between Pretoria and Harare. And a lot has been said, a lot has been done, and we see once again at this stage long queues forming at the border post between South Africa and Zimbabwe. And I think one of the more concerning issues is, of course, what seems to be brewing discontent among some citizens in the country about the situation, and it is multifaceted. But joining us now to discuss some of these issues is political analyst Dr. Ralph Mathekga. Ralph, good morning. Thanks so much for speaking to us.
Good morning, Sakina, and good morning to Morning Live viewers at home.
Ralph, this is by no means a new situation. We seem to go through this after every festive season holiday when we see Zimbabwean migrants coming back to South Africa. But let's just take a look at the situation as it has developed regarding the permits, employment permits, that situation leading up to the festive holidays, and where we find ourselves now, where there seems to be a backlash. There's a group calling themselves the Santon branch of ZANU-PF, who've come out very vociferously against Home Affairs Minister Dr. Motsoaledi. But what's your take overall on this particular situation?
I mean, Sakina, the whole thing, it started politically. We've seen Home Affairs Minister politically taking a very, very strong position than before, saying that he's not going to renew those permits. But Minister Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, he has been quite firm on that before, that he wants to deal with the question of immigration. The question, Sakina, is that there is a pressure, local pressure from within South Africa, that the ANC-led government is seen as taking control of this, because it appeared as if the ANC-led government had no plan on what to do, had no clear immigration plan, particularly in relation to Zimbabwe and within the region. It was almost like a gentleman's agreement. We will get special permits and so forth. The two countries seem not to have fully engaged, but the consequences of that, Sakina, are beginning to bear locally within South Africa. You are seeing South Africa politics taking a turn whereby the issue of immigration is coming out to the center. The ANC is forced to act almost immediately. The challenge is the shock. Can you really implement a measure such as this within this short space of time without creating massive displacement, massive diplomatic problems as we are seeing coming out? And the answer is no, you cannot do that. At the center of it, Sakina, as well, is the poor level of engagement between the ANC and ZANU-PF. They have never been firm and clear to each other. The ANC protected ZANU-PF in the past, and then the ZANU-PF is expecting the ANC to shoulder its own problems. There is no clear channels, diplomatic channel, a clear criteria. Now what we are seeing, Sakina, is escalation of this thing. It is retaliation at a diplomatic level. What needs to happen is the two countries need to come forth and be clear as to what are their plans about this crisis, because it is affecting the two countries almost nearly equally now.
When we look at this situation historically, you go back to the days of quiet diplomacy with Zimbabwe from the South African side, and you look at where things are today, Ralph. Is it time for South Africa, and not just Zimbabwe, but regionally in SADC, for leaders, at least at this level, to have honest and authentic conversations about the problems that we face?
Sakina, South Africa is a very dominant force in the region. We have to face that. It's a country that is one of the strong in the region, infrastructure, it relies on its budget and so forth. One would have expected that at a regional level, South Africa will put this on the agenda in the past and try to engage with other countries to say that how do we deal with this? It is a spillover into South Africa. But I think the problem here, Sakina, and I'm glad you are raising this thing historically, because I've also looked at it historically. I think that the domination here in the region is that if you look across the region in the past few years, and it's still a trend now, you are going to find out that most of the parties that are in charge are former comrades. Those are your liberation parties from the same tradition. And one thing that I think is quite weak about that party system and about how the tradition that has dominated these parties in Zim, in Angola, in Namibia and so forth, is their lack of appetite to deal with the real fundamentals of what it means to build a state. You need borders. You need to be able to engage. The whole concept of a state, Sakina, to start with, you cannot build a state on the basis that we are comrades, on the basis that we share solidarity. You need clear lines of boundary where we are saying, this is how we are going to engage. You are going to cross the borders on the basis of this. This does not mean that you are using what people call maybe those imperialistic instruments. It is just a simple issue of defining how you are going to engage. That debate was never held, Sakina. We are now in a crisis in the region, and most of these parties are becoming politically weaker in their respective their respective jurisdictions within the region. They are being forced to deal with this thing locally by communities from below. They are being forced to generate a strategy at the moment of a crisis. They need to go back to the region and take that collective responsibility to say, how do we deal with this at the region? South Africa, the ANC becoming weaker as well, Sakina, internally, it is making it difficult to exert its own agenda or even to show what South Africa stands for, even at the regional level. ZANU-PF is also calculating how dare can ZANU-PF announce that they have a regional branch in Sandton if they have not gauged the weakness of the ANC internally.
And that is the crux of the matter, isn't it, Ralph? The fact that things in South Africa have regressed over time, and therefore the situation in South Africa is more dire. You have a South Africa that now is sitting with record unemployment levels. We are still dealing with the triple threat that has been with us almost constantly since the advent of democracy. And then, of course, you listen to the Minister of Home Affairs and just the problems that he faces in trying to control influx into South Africa at the borders. I remember before the end of last year at the Libombo border post with Mozambique, where the minister had gone out there and 6 people had been arrested because people were simply not going back. There are rackets being run, doing all sorts of nefarious things to ensure that people get into South Africa illegally and stay here by hook or by crook. But then when the minister talks about around 70-75% of the women giving birth in Musina, for example, being Zimbabwean nationals, surely that's indicative of a greater crisis. You can't just turn a blind eye to that, and it then starts to give credence to why South Africans feel as though they are being overrun, Ralph.
Indeed, Sakina, these things have been raised, and the difficulty and the sensitivity here, Sakina, is that it is always difficult for people to find that balance that we are talking about, to say that they need to be human solidarity. South Africans need to be in solidarity with Zimbabweans as their fellow brothers, sisters, and so forth. But at the state level, there need to be terms of engagement, Sakina. You cannot have a situation where you don't even know the state of the problem. I mean, if you ask government to actually even enumerate on these problems, their health access and so forth, you can just see that it's almost even a conservative guess that is being taken, that is being given out, still does not look good. And I think that where we are now, Sakina, the problem here is that now the ANC-led government is beginning to feel that there will be punishment if we are not attending to this issue. And South Africa's politics is changing very interestingly. As an observer, I'm observing these things. Some of them, they started in Europe, the immigration policy, how it affects the local politics, Sakina. You are seeing in South Africa this talk. You are seeing in South Africa some of the party leaders coming out and taking a firm, what you can call maybe even a populist position on this thing, on immigration. And the ANC has presided on this problem for a long time. I don't think, Sakina, where we are, you should still wake up in the morning and say, I'm shutting down. You still need the policy. The reason why you are pushed to say, I'm shutting down tomorrow, is because you did not have a policy over a period of time. But I still think that this thing is so disruptive. Sakina, if you were actually to do that, to effectively say we are cancelling those permits in all. South Africa might also find it difficult to survive in the short term because of the dependency that has also been created in terms of the labor and so forth. We also need to be realistic about that. Hence, you still need a strategy that you're going to use in the long term. You cannot just only have your strategy based on the populist response, whereby you just perform badly in the election, you want to solve this in 1 week. It does not help. The problem is already yours. You are going to live with it longer. Find a constructive way to deal with it in the long term. Get countries back to the table in the region.
So let's talk about this dependency on the labor front, Ralph. South Africa's unemployment rate is high as it is, and this is what gets South Africans hot under the collar, the fact that we have such unacceptably high unemployment rates, and yet there seems to be, as you say, a dependency on employment from not only Zimbabwe, but other SADC countries as well. How so? How does that situation come about, and how does it square with South Africa trying to resolve this unemployment crisis?
Sakina, that's a very controversial issue. I mean, when you look at the enumeration, you look at unemployment in South Africa, indeed it's very high. South Africans are having a difficulty. But we also have to understand how some of the industries in South Africa have adjusted themselves to depend solely on this labor to a point where in a medium to short term, some of them will not function if they were to be quickly, immediately reoriented to be saying that, look, you no longer have this access. And Sakina, these are controversial issues. Look at what is happening within the restaurant business, for example. If you were not to have that labor in the restaurant in some areas, you are shutting down. We have observed this thing. I have seen this in another country, Sakina. I've had the fortune of living in another country where I've seen how the local economy sometimes adjusts in line with how you implement the law. If you are not strong on the law that says hire the locals on the basis of this category, hire someone who's coming from outside on the basis of this clear category, the businesses will just adjust as long as they make money and survive. Before you know it, you are locked into this sinister dependency in a way that it becomes highly inconvenient to immediately win yourself out of this. You got yourself into this one, Sakina.
You know, and obviously South Africa would be very concerned about its image internationally and especially on the continent. That being said, though, and yes, we do acknowledge that there have been blots on our reputation as a result of xenophobic attacks, etc. However, Ralph, if we look at the issue of protectionism and the fact that people are coming into South Africa to take up menial jobs, to take up low-level skilled jobs, why is it that we are not, as South Africa, looking at protecting certain categories of jobs for South Africans, or why is it that people are not abiding by the rules in that regard?
You know, Sakina, rules are painful, and sometimes people tend to think that rules are intrusive when they are being implemented, but the rules are aimed at particular shared goals. Once you have a shared goal in a society that say, we want to produce this egalitarian society, we want to produce this society that is not perfect, but that is nearly fair. And in order for us to be able to do that, we are going to make sure that we bring about equitable distribution of opportunities within. We know that the economy distributes. We know everyone can wake up and go to work, but we know that there are groups that are vulnerable. We need to be able to have policies that help. You implement those policies. You have capacity to implement those policies. You monitor. You therefore evaluate. If you can have such kind of program, you can therefore make sure that some of the returns in your society, you can distribute in line with what you want, instead of always being saying that returns will be distributed naturally by the law of natural lottery or whatsoever. You know it doesn't work. You know that women are going to end up not getting access to jobs, not because they are not qualified for those jobs, because the system is beginning not to favor them. You need to be able to correct by intervention. We are not agreeing with those corrective measures, Sakina. You want people to walk away, start saying to them, let us pursue certain goals. What we don't understand, though, is that it becomes a recipe for disaster. you end up with a society whereby you have got employment, but the problem is the poor distribution of employment opportunities to your people. That's what you have in South Africa. You may have jobs. If you look at this economy, you look at a lot, you might find that there are menial jobs, there are opportunities that are being created, but it is the distribution pattern of those jobs that is lacking. And why is it lacking? Because you don't have a policy to deal with that.
Which is, of course, unacceptable at this stage, Ralph. But what is the solution? Because if you look at social media at the moment, and you have these ramblings at the moment just beneath the surface, if you are on certain groups, you get these voice notes of people and communities becoming really agitated. As you can see there, these are some of the videos that are doing the rounds currently on social media, and these are of Zimbabwean nationals trying to come into South Africa. And some, we've been told, have been sitting there for days. Some are actually risking life and limb by crossing the Limpopo River. We were told of a boat that may have capsized, killing 8 people. People really risking it all to come through, cross that border into South Africa. But again, Ralph, are the Zimbabwean authorities doing enough to assist South Africa in dealing with this situation?
I don't think they're doing enough, Sakina. I think that Zimbabwean authorities are pushing the problem down the stream, and I don't think they're doing enough. I think they're continuing to fail the citizens of Zimbabwe. And we also have to understand the human condition, Sakina. Authorities and state actors are quite different from human being. The footage you are seeing there, it's a human being. It's not a state institution. It's a human being at the bed bridge, what they're experiencing, and so forth. And I think South Africans, to that extent, have shown compassion to that. They worry about that condition. But I do think that South Africa need to take a position in relation to Zimbabwe. Not to say that South Africa need to start to be like Britain in relation to Zimbabwe, but let us be more practical and have practical engagement. I do think that the two countries, if they are willing, they can engage and de-escalate and engage. But currently, fighting on Twitter, I mean, Sakina, there is just something wrong to see people in authority fighting on Twitter and on social media. It's just not okay.
And we can deny it all we like, but we have seen these scenes before, Ralph, and it is clear that something needs to be done. Government needs to take the corrective steps to address this matter. As having a short conversation with Saftu Zwelinzima Vavi, and he spoke about a call that was made at some point for an RDP of the region. So a reconstruction and development program, not just for South Africa as it was emerging at the time, but for the entire region, because he says, South Africa cannot develop as an island, because even if you have this one country developing and the others are not developing in sync, you still looking down the barrel, staring down the barrel at problems, because we will continue to see what we are currently seeing. So at what point does SADC really take cognizance of the reality of these problems and, make sure that we do not see escalations to the levels that we've seen in 2008 and previous years, where things really got out of hand?
Indeed, Sakina, South Africa cannot develop as an island. And I think that if you look at some of the challenges that we are experiencing in South Africa, the way in which generally citizens are beginning to relate to power, citizens demanding what is due to them, you can say that there are regional trends that are coming out. You can even see among you can see party politics within the region, opposition, and so forth. So you can identify trends across the region in a way that those issues can be dealt with maybe at a central level, or a common approach can be found within the region. I mean, Sakina, there is the African peer review mechanism. I thought, my view was that, I remember working on it far back. My thought was that it will help some of the government in the region to try to subscribe to similar principles when it comes to accountability, when it comes to how institutions of power relate to citizens. And in that way, you've got a common picture, you've got a peer influence across the region. I hear it is still underway, but the problem within the region, Sakina, is that there is too much unilateralism and bilateralism. There isn't a multilateralism where countries come and use this regional head, the subject, to deal with this problem. You are going to find out that while South Africa and Botswana are trying to work out something, Angola, Mozambique is deploying soldiers from Rwanda while they don't even understand what's going on here. It is at the level of embarrassment what is going on within the region when it comes to diplomatic coherence. And the problem is that political parties that are in charge within the region, they're supposed to be coming from the same tradition, but yet they don't sit and talk and consolidate at the regional level. They're still acting a lot individually. They're surviving at this point, Sakina.
I must tell you, Siya Koza, the spokesperson at the Department of Home Affairs, he's just sent me a message about the situation. He says he's currently in Musina and there isn't any congestion. Everything seems to be okay. Everything seems to be fine. And travelers are processed in an orderly fashion. So there's nothing untoward going on. And saying he's been there since Saturday, there hasn't been any congestion on any of the days. And Siya, we obviously would like to talk to you as well about some of these developments, some of what has been said about the handling of the situation regarding the permits. And of course, this situation as it develops every time there's an influx of people across the border, because yesterday, what people were saying, and this was my understanding, was that the problem was in this area, this stretch that they call no man's land, which is between the South African and Zimbabwean border posts. So somewhere in between there, people are stuck, and people were talking about all sorts of issues that are going on there. So I'm not sure if that situation has been looked into, Siya, but we will speak to Home Affairs about the situation. But Ralph, it is a worrying one. It is one that has to be addressed, but it's beyond talk. And the other thing that also seems to be bugging South Africans, if you look at the so-called ZANU-PF branch, Sandton branch, that letter that they put out, the communication, people are also concerned about how Pretoria, how South Africa responds to some of these matters. Some were critical that government was very silent on the matter. They would have expected a much more forceful response given that attack on the Minister of Home Affairs, and saying it actually took ZANU-PF to distance itself and castigate the so-called branch for what was said. So how would you assess government's response to a situation like this and some other situations that have developed in similar circumstances in the country with foreign nationals from other countries?
I think, Sakina, it's more like the ANC-led government has got more challenges. You know, when we have challenges, they're genuine. Some of them they're self-created and so forth. When you're internally weak, some of these issues, I don't think you really gain fit to comment on some of them. I've seen the engagement between ZANU-PF and the ANC, the manner in which sometimes ZANU-PF can just pronounce itself in relation to the ANC, you know, openly. It just shows the lack of respect between the two. And I do think as well that government's response in relation to this, I don't know if this is maybe based out of solidarity. I don't know whether there are other channels of communication that exist that we are not exposed to, where these issues are being dealt with, Sakina, because these issues come out and suddenly they disappear, but you don't really have a clear formal statement. It creates anxiety. If you are South African, government is in charge, you are seeing a branch that is clearly a small outfit and communicating from within your own country in this way. It then says a lot about your politics. It actually says anything goes.
Well, Ralph, thanks so much for speaking to us. And as I say, we will speak to Home Affairs as well. Home Affairs are saying all been processed, all well. But I guess the problem here is, again, you know, when people are having certain discussions. And again, because of our history, because of what we've seen happen previously with xenophobic flare-ups, I think it's important that these issues are dealt with as and when they arise and not allowed to escalate. So thank you so much, Dr. Ralph Mathekga, for speaking to us this morning. And as always, your views are welcome at Morning Live SABC.